Amazing transformation. A 75-year-old man's life changed forever when Jesus entered his captivity. Harold Thompson woke up again to the incessant creaking of his old home, a reminder that time was relentless. At 75, he felt the weight of solitude pressing down on him like a fog that refused to lift. His wife, Helen, had been the laughter in these walls, the warmth of Sunday dinners around a table now cold and empty. Now, as he sipped his morning coffee, its bitter taste seemed a reflection of his own life, a sharp contrast to the sweetness it once held. Each day mirrored the last. He awoke, ate, and retreated into a silence that echoed. What did it matter if he was still here? Would his absence even be noticed? 5 years had passed since Helen's passing, yet Harold felt her absence like a gaping wound. He struggled with the creeping fear of becoming a burden, of leaning too heavily on friends who might have their own lives to live. It made him hesitant to reach out, even as the loneliness gnawed at him from the inside. He'd managed to keep up with his health, but little issues like high blood pressure and a persistent cough reminded him that he wasn't as invincible as he once believed. The world was moving on, and he felt himself standing still, afraid to let anyone in, yet desperate for connection. One fateful afternoon, he found himself wandering aimlessly through town, aimlessly strolling until a sign tugged at his heart. "Welcome home," it read, bright and inviting in front of a little church on Elm and Main. Something within him flickered but hesitated. Why go in? Churches were for families and the hopeful, not for lonely old men carrying emotional baggage. Yet, before he could talk himself out of it, his feet led him through the doors, taking a seat in the back pew as if blending into the shadows. As the young pastor, full of vigor and genuine warmth, began to speak, Harold felt the enthusiasm wash over him. Words of hope filled the air, wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. "It's never too late to live with purpose," the pastor declared passionately. Yet every word was a challenge. An uncomfortable stirring began in Harold's chest. Could he dare to believe again? Could he rise from this pit of despair and embrace life? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As days blurred into weeks, Harold found himself returning. A bond grew with the pastor, and with that connection came a reluctant stirring of dreams he had shelved long ago, mentoring, teaching, sharing. Yet, lurking beneath that flicker of hope was an intricate web of contradictions. He felt the slightly familiar tug of anxiety mixed with the pulsing hope that refused to die, even as self-doubt held him captive. As he contemplated reaching out to lead a small group in the community, something soured his resolve. The ghost of his past surfaced. Old grudges and biases he thought long buried began scratching at his conscience. What was he really willing to face? Could he truly mend bridges he had burned? As the weight of these emerging truths bore down, he stood at the threshold of a crossroads, unsure if he was ready to confront the shadows that danced around his heart. The fear of rejection loomed large, a beast ready to devour the little light he had begun to find. In his quiet room, wrestling with these thoughts, he realized he was standing at an emotional cliff, one step into the light or tumbling back into obscurity. With the grand reopening of the park approaching, he couldn't ignore the call, the trembling whisper in his heart. Would he allow fear to win, or could he somehow muster the courage to confront his past, to grasp the tenuous threads of connection left before they slipped away? A deep breath escaped him, a question hanging in the air as he prepared to face what lay ahead. Harold stood at the crossroads of his heart, a mixture of pulsating fear and a flicker of hope swirling within him. Each moment felt both heavy and electric. He could either let the darkness swallow him whole or take a courageous step toward the light that had started reaching into the crevices of his spirit. The memory of the pastor's words lingered, echoing in his mind. It's never too late to live with purpose. Purpose. It was a word he had almost forgotten. As the days passed, the park's reopening loomed in the distance, igniting something deep within him. It wasn't just a social gathering. It felt like an opportunity to contribute, to reclaim some semblance of the life he once had. A chance to connect, to teach, and maybe even to heal. Yet, standing there contemplating, Harold felt the crushing weight of years filled with unresolved conflicts. Would the friends he'd lost still welcome him? Would the ties he had severed allow themselves to be mended? With a determination that surprised him, he sat at his old desk, the one that had once been a hub of creativity and plans. He grabbed a well-worn notebook, pages filled with the scrawls of his thoughts, dreams, and fears. He opened it and began to write, a potential agenda for a small group he felt drawn to lead. What could he offer? Perhaps shared experiences, reflections on life's trials, cultivating faith even when it felt unfathomable. But as he wrote, doubt seeped in, dark and oily, threatening to smother the flickering flame of hope. "Who would listen to an old man like me?" he muttered aloud, the silence around him offering no comfort. Yet the answer echoed softly in his chest. "Those who are lost might crave your wisdom, Harold." After days of internal wrestling, he decided to reach out to the pastor. A simple email crafted with an anxious heart explained his thoughts and struggles, surrendering to the vulnerability he had long feared. By the time he hit send, his breath was shallow, anxiety churning in his gut. Had he committed a grave error? The unknown stretched before him, expansive and terrifying. That evening, a notification popped up on his phone. The pastor's response filled him with a swell of relief. It was warm and encouraging, but it also had an undertone of challenge. "Let's brainstorm together. Your wisdom can guide many, Harold, and I'd love to help facilitate that for our community." As he read, a stirring of anticipation ignited, but it was soon clouded by skepticism. Who was he kidding? Could he actually pull this off? He reminisced on the feedback from his past ventures, how criticism had silenced him, how insecurity had bent his will. Yet, in this new light, he resisted the urge to curl back into a shell. Instead, with the weight of decision resting heavily on his shoulders, he embraced a small ray of stubborn hope. Perhaps a redefined version of his old self was emerging, a Harold willing to foster dialogues rather than retreat into despair. He had mentored youth before. The urge to uplift flickered within him, fragile but present. The evening quiet draped around him again. He contemplated his next actions, fighting for clarity. Then it dawned on him, as if a light switch had been flipped. He needed a plan, a way to step into this new role. He pored over the notebook he had opened days before, setting aside fears to write. He wasn't just looking to teach. That vision felt mundane. He craved conversation, connection, and honesty. Each stroke of ink began to weave together the possibility of something he could never define before, a legacy of resilience. As dawn broke, he sensed a palpable shift. People were becoming more than just strangers. They were potential companions in what he hoped would be a transformative journey for them all. But just as he started to believe, a nagging thought crept in. What would happen when faced with those he had wronged? What would he do when life's inevitable conflict arose? With a firm determination taking root in his heart, he recognized that the time had come to face not just the community, but himself. A world of possibilities lay ahead, yet so did the specter of his past. Would he embrace this new challenge,
or shrink once again into the shadows where he had grown too comfortable. The whisper of uncertainty lingered as he steeled himself for the collision of resolve and doubt that awaited him.
Harold stared at the blank page, fingers poised over the ink of his pen, the dappled morning light filtering through the window, casting a warm glow on the worn surface of his desk. This was more than an office. It was a sanctuary for his thoughts, his explorations of fear and hope. The knowledge that he was about to step into the unknown weighed heavily, but beneath that weight, an unfamiliar thrill pulsed within him. He wanted not just to guide, but to fully engage with the people who would soon fill the park. Choosing vulnerability over retreat, he opened his notebook and scribbled a few key topics that felt pertinent: self-forgiveness, vulnerability in community, rebuilding relationships. His goal had shifted. He desired more than just a structured gathering. He envisioned a fertile ground where stories could intertwine, where honesty would invite healing among those gathered. But as he composed his thoughts, shadows of doubt cast their web, ensnaring his imagination with memories of past failures. Failure. The word dripped with bitterness, porous like the scars left from his previous attempts to connect with others. Would the shadows of his past seep into this new endeavor? Would those lost connections taint the beauty of potential reconnection? His mind circled back, unbidden, to the faces of colleagues and friends. Their laughter now echoes in a distant void. Harold questioned if they would even dare to step into the space he was creating, knowing the hurt he had caused. After a moment's hesitation, he made a decision that countered the impulse to retreat. He needed to confront his shaking past. Picking up his phone, he typed a tentative message to a former colleague, someone he had burnt bridges with all those years ago. "I'd like to make amends." He pressed send, almost feeling like he was throwing a life raft into turbulent waters. Anxiety coiled in his stomach, but it felt more alive than fear constricted. With that small act, he felt slightly more resilient. Embracing this discomfort became imperative, as he realized that his journey demanded more than just awareness. It called for action. To connect with others, he had to first acknowledge and articulate his own regrets, the fractures he had fled from for too long. Entering into that reflective confrontation pushed him further along the path of his own growth. For the first time, he sat in the discomfort rather than fleeing it. How could he teach others about resilience if he wasn't willing to show up authentically, bruised yet hopeful? Nevertheless, the memory of every critic hung in the air like a warning bell, urging him to consider the risk of vulnerability. To quell the anxiety weaving its grip around his thoughts, he chose to write about his feelings, confronting the shame that frequently silenced him. "What if they judge me?" he began, his pen flowing, a cathartic release. "What if they don't see the change I've gone through and only remember the old man?" As words poured onto the page, he found clarity, revelatory threads of insight linking the past to the present. His self-worth was not contingent on others' perceptions. This morning, the ink transformed into a manifesto for personal resilience. Suddenly, the lingering question resounded through him with renewed urgency. What awaited him in those park meetings beyond his own apprehensions? The prospect of reconciling with not only his community, but also with himself, cast both excitement and dread into sharp relief. Just as he felt the thrill of movement toward reconciliation, a ping interrupted the moment. The colleague he reached out to had responded. He took a deep breath, heart racing, and opened the message. Would it summon dread or recognition of a shared journey? A flicker of warmth engulfed him as he began to read. "I'd like to meet and talk. It's about time." What Harold didn't know was that this wasn't merely a message. It was a turning point beckoning him toward a whirlwind of confrontations. Would this beginning, the bridge he was attempting to build, finally lead him toward redemption? Or would he falter at this crucial juncture? The path of transformation loomed before him, both exhilarating and fraught with obstacles he had yet to imagine. Harold stared at the screen, the words glowing before him, nearly pulsing with the weight of potential. "It's about time." Those words echoed like a distant drum, marking the rhythm of his heart as anticipation clashed with anxiety. The invitation to meet rang in his ears, teasing the vision of reconnection. He leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath, allowing the reality of this moment to wash over him. The path he had initiated now seemed to stretch infinitely ahead, a road filled with shadows of fear and the warm light of hope. He picked up his pen once more, now emboldened, as the ink would begin forming a blueprint for his next steps. What would he say? How could he encapsulate years of pain and regret, yet emerge transformed, ready to embrace criticism or validation from those who once stood by him? Each thought brushed against a barrier he had held for too long. Would they still see him as the man he once was, or would they perceive the change he had fought so hard to cultivate? Harold's fingers danced over the page, sketching out the contours of what he hoped this meeting would unravel. He wrote about forgiveness, not just seeking it, but offering it. The revelation dawned on him. He had to forgive himself first to truly be free. He was drawing the delicate threads of his heart, weaving them into a tapestry of honesty and vulnerability. There was a tentative beauty in recognizing the split between his expectations and the reality he faced. As he penned his thoughts, clarity surged. Each stroke of the pen felt like a cleansing wave, washing away the shame that had clung to him like mildew. He paused, reflecting on the journey he had undertaken.
The act of reaching out was more than just mending a friendship. It was a confrontation of his own failures. Would he stand firm in his newfound resilience, or would the insecurities rise to the surface when faced with the reality of connections he longed to revive? Later that evening, Harold prepared for the meeting, his heart racing as he replayed the words he would share. Sitting at his kitchen table, under the soft glow of a single lamp, he examined his reflection in the window. The lines on his face told stories, maps of experiences colored by moments of joy and deep regret. Admitting his imperfections became his strength rather than a source of shame. This was his moment, to show that growth was not linear, but rather a labyrinth of missteps leading to self-acceptance. Time ticked away, each second reminiscent of a sigh. The prospect of reconnecting made him question whether he was ready for the cascade of emotions that awaited him. Would his courage withstand the confrontation? Would he find favor in their eyes, or would they remain captive to the memories of the man he used to be? The next morning dawned, heralded by a sense of determination. As Harold approached the park, anticipation radiated through him, tinged with nervous energy. The surroundings seemed vibrant, echoing his emotional landscape. He spotted his former colleague sitting on a bench, a familiar figure, yet cloaked in the distance of past grievances. A rush of doubt surged through him. For a moment, uncertainty filled the air like an electric charge. Would he be able to articulate his journey? Would his words translate the depth of regret he had harbored? Steeling his resolve, Harold moved forward. It was time to navigate the tension of their shared history. The moment had come to face both the past and the person he had become. With each step, he could feel the profound weight of this encounter pressing down, mixing nostalgia with the adrenaline of possibility. Just as he reached the bench, he took another deep breath, and the air seemed to shimmer with the promise of transformation. Yet, as he sat down, the first words to break the silence hung heavy in the air. "Can we talk about what happened?" At that moment, Harold realized he was not only confronting the past, but also igniting the potential for reconciliation, a daunting task that required more than determination. Would he find peace in connection, or face a new labyrinth of emotional turmoil? His heart thundered in his chest as he prepared to navigate the uncharted waters of redemption. Harold felt a tremor beneath the surface as he caught the gaze of his former colleague, a mix of wariness and curiosity reflected in those familiar eyes. The weight of that intent expression washed over him, amplifying the nerve-wracking silence that followed. In this shared stillness, he sensed the gravity of what was unspoken, the shared history, the unresolved tensions, and the hopes floating fragilely between them.
"Can we talk about what happened?" sounded like the catalyst for a storm, yet he knew it was an opening, a chance to forge something new out of the remnants of their shared past. With that simple invitation, Harold's heart beat in sync with a newfound resolve, each thump an affirmation of his willingness to confront rather than evade. "I want to apologize," he started, his voice steady but colored with the remnants of trepidation, "for everything that went wrong. The decisions I made that affected not just me, but this entire team." He held the weight of his words, allowing the gravity of his acknowledgement to settle in the space between them. What would it take to rebuild trust, he wondered, as he drew in a steadying breath. Could his humility weave itself into the fabric of their communication? His former colleague, Sarah, sat there, absorbing every syllable. Harold noticed the light flicker in her eyes, a kind of cautious hope. She was a professional accustomed to confrontation, yet the emotional stakes had never been this personal. "Harold," she gestured, "it's difficult to forget the way you left. You were absent in more ways than one." Absence. The word hung like a heavy cloud. Harold flinched internally, but pressed on, knowing that the honesty of his reflections would define this moment. "I get that. I was ashamed and scared. I thought distancing myself would protect you all, but instead it was my fear that ended up isolating me. I've learned that running from my mistakes only deepened the scars. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now," he met her gaze, "but I am here to take responsibility." Every moment pulsed with the potential for pain, but also healing. Sarah's expression softened, and he could see the conflict raging beneath her professional demeanor. Their historical rapport wove through this exchange, now tinged with vulnerability. "Sometimes it takes a breakdown to build something stronger," she finally replied, the barriers between them shifting subtly. "But it's not a smooth process. We need more than apologies." "Then let's work on it," Harold impulsively suggested, "together. I'm willing to show you I've changed. I want to be a part of this team again, not as the person who ran away, but as someone who seeks collaboration, support, and," he hesitated slightly, "forgiveness." His heart raced as he laid bare his intention, offering himself at the mercy of her verdict. Would she see his sincerity or just the remnants of the person who hurt them all? "Let's take it step by step," Sarah replied slowly, the tension of the moment transmuting into a catalyst for something deeper. There was no quick fix, no shimmer of immediate resolution, but the dawning of a new dialogue. As the conversation deepened, Harold realized that he was not just presenting his reformed self, he was inviting vulnerability in return, stirring the potential for growth within the professional bonds they once shared. In this moment, he felt the chains of his past loosening painfully, yet liberating. But beneath the burgeoning hope lay the shadow of doubt. Was he truly ready to bear the weight of this reconciliation? And what if the foundations of their shared history proved too fragile to support this new endeavor? As if sensing his internal battle, Sarah paused, her next words hanging in the air, teasing the edge of revelation. "Harold, if we're going to revisit this, we must confront not just the choices of the past, but the people who led those choices. Are you prepared to face them?" Harold's breath caught, and in the tremor of realization, he sensed the labyrinth stretching before him once again. This was no longer just about his or Sarah's feelings. It enveloped their entire professional history, trailing back through the shadows of past encounters. As they hovered on the brink of deeper dialogue, he was confronted with a haunting possibility. He took a moment to process her statement. What darkness lurked there, and would he find the same clarity that had brought him thus far? The conversation was just beginning, and the path ahead twisted wildly. Harold sat in an uneasy silence, the implications of Sarah's question lingering like a thick fog. The labyrinth she referenced appeared daunting, each twist and turn filled with invisible hazards, reminders of struggles long buried yet unresolved. The idea of confronting others, the very colleagues he once relied upon, provoked a swirl of emotions. Could he withstand the scrutiny? Would they perceive him as the man he'd become, or the one who had abandoned them? "I'm ready," he found himself stating, with a suddenness that surprised even him. Authenticity demanded courage, and as he spoke, he felt a flicker of determination ignite within. Sarah's gaze was searching, weighing the truth of his response. "All right," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We can't avoid that conversation any longer. The team deserves to know where we stand, and to see if it's worth rebuilding. But you have to understand, it won't be easy. Not all of them will be as open to your explanation as I am." What an understatement, Harold mused. The task before him loomed larger than the tallest skyscrapers downtown. But as he locked eyes with Sarah, a certain calm washed over him. Reconnecting with not just her, but the entire team would require transparency. As they left the coffee shop, he felt a sense of purpose flooding through him, mingled with a palpable anxiety. Each step felt heavy, weighted with historical implications. They approached the office building, a place where ambitions had once thrived along with disappointments. Inside, the walls hummed with the familiar energy of activity. Voices echoed in hallways, punctuated by the distant sound of keyboards clacking, a symphony of purpose. Harold's pulse quickened as they headed to the conference room. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked, her tone shifting to one of concern. "More than anything," he answered, surprised by the conviction in his voice. He was prepared to right the wrongs of his past, but doubt fluttered in his chest like a trapped bird. How would his colleagues react? Emotions were bound to surface, and not all of them would be forgiving. As he stood in front of the gathered team, faces he had known, faces that had always mirrored his own hopes and fears, Harold's throat tightened. This was not simply a meeting, it was a reckoning. "Thank you for being here," he began, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words felt stuck, trapped somewhere between his intentions and the room's expectant silence. "I know I owe all of you an explanation, and an apology." His voice trembled ever so slightly. The tension in the room thickened as he shared his journey. How fear had driven him from his responsibilities, how regret had tethered him in a self-imposed exile. Some faces softened, signaling a trace of understanding, while others remained rigid, reflecting skepticism. He focused on Jennifer, a team member who had seemed particularly hurt by his absence. As he sought her gaze, he hoped his honesty would resonate, that a thread of connection could be spun once again. "Jennifer, I understand if you feel betrayed. I truly do." He leaned forward, desperation lacing his words. "I know trust is earned, but I'm willing to work tirelessly to regain yours. I want to be better, for you, for us." The silence felt charged. Would they allow his vulnerability to pave the way for rejuvenation? Or would they turn their backs on a past they had never truly moved away from? "Harold," Jennifer finally spoke, her voice steady. "It's going to take more than words." There was a collective inhalation throughout the room as her statement landed. Nods occurred around the table, signaling an unspoken agreement. He could sense a wave of uncertainty, but also a shred of hope blossoming. But beneath the words lay an unexpressed fear. What steps would more than words entail? Would he be capable of demonstrating the change he'd promised? The barrier separating them was wrought with memories,
scars that would linger long after their meeting concluded. As they discussed next steps, Harold felt the true weight of his mission settling firmly upon his shoulders. There was no turning back now. The moment bled into a powerful resolve for transformation, yet an unsettling realization clawed at his gut, a prophecy of challenges yet to come. Could he withstand the trials ahead, or would the past consume him once more? The wheels had started turning, but how far would they allow him to roll before the safety brakes were inevitably put back into place? Harold stood among his colleagues, a maze of vulnerability and resolve swirling through his mind. In that moment, every nod and every skeptical face mirrored back to him the essence of his journey.
He had stepped into this conference room as a former ghost of himself, fully aware that the walls were inscribed not just with memories of accomplishments, but also with the heavy shadows of his abandonment. Yet here, amidst the tangible tension, lay the fertile ground for radical change. "What do you mean by more than words?" he pressed, redirecting the question to Jennifer and pulling the focus back to the center of the group. The room was taut with silence, the pulse of anticipation thumping like a drum. Jennifer shot him a careful glance. "It means demonstrating commitment, showing through actions that you're serious about healing these wounds. We need to see your willingness to engage, not just talk." "Engage in what way?" Harold replied, his voice steadying. The questions had awakened a new resolve within him. Self-examination was essential, and clarity became an ally he hadn't fully recognized before. "We need collaboration," another colleague chimed in. "Trust isn't built in a day. It requires tangible efforts. Let's say, for starters, regular check-ins. We'll speak openly about our struggles, but you'll need to share too, Harold." The call for mutual investment anchored within him. It offered an opportunity not just to regain trust, but to build something richer, a collective purpose. He could almost feel the weight of old expectations lifting, allowing room for this fresh chapter of authenticity. Yet, lurking in the back of his mind was doubt. How would he balance his newfound commitment with the challenges he had previously navigated alone? "I agree," Harold said, adopting a strategy that danced with confrontation and revelation. "But the road is also about accountability. I will want feedback, honest feedback, and I expect you to be direct with me. If I slip up, call me out." He could sense the room shift slightly as faces registered surprise at his willingness to invite scrutiny. Taking a step forward, he let the gravity of his past hang heavy in the air. "I know I've fallen short before, but this time I want to learn. If we'll face the labyrinth together, then I'll be standing by your side rather than turning my back." Nods began to spread through the group, bit by bit, an acknowledgement of the challenge and a burgeoning acceptance of Harold's efforts. The conversation shifted into specifics about team dynamics, with individuals sharing what they hope to see change, establishing parameters and the groundwork for accountability. The engagements were taxing. Each comment summoned another reflection. It was a tough space, but a necessary one. Harold meticulously noted each concern voiced, aware that silencing his own tears of vulnerability could fortify a bridge between past and present. However, while discussions flourished with a flicker of hope, self-doubt began to weave threads of darkness. Could he maintain this atmosphere of openness? What if his efforts fell flat, leading him straight back into isolation? "I agree," Harold said, adopting a strategy that danced with confrontation and revelation. "But the road is also about accountability. I will want feedback, honest feedback, and I expect you to be direct with me. If I slip up, call me out." He could sense the room shift slightly as faces registered surprise at his willingness to invite scrutiny. Taking a step forward, he let the gravity of his past hang heavy in the air. "I know I've fallen short before, but this time I want to learn.
If we'll face the labyrinth together, then I'll be standing by your side rather than turning my back." Nods began to spread through the group, bit by bit, an acknowledgement of the challenge and a burgeoning acceptance of Harold's efforts. The conversation shifted into specifics about team dynamics, with individuals sharing what they hope to see change, establishing parameters and the groundwork for accountability. The engagements were taxing. Each comment summoned another reflection. It was a tough space, but a necessary one. Harold meticulously noted each concern voiced, aware that silencing his own tears of vulnerability could fortify a bridge between past and present. However, while discussions flourished with a flicker of hope, self-doubt began to weave threads of darkness. Could he maintain this atmosphere of openness? What if his efforts fell flat, leading him straight back into isolation?
After the meeting ended, Harold lingered for a moment, eyes drifting to the conference table where the echoes of their voices still hung. He felt both the exhilaration of sharing openness and the looming shadows reminding him that he had a long road ahead. As he walked towards his office, the wild dance of resolve and uncertainty coursed through him. The personal and professional labyrinth he now tread was deceptive and full of unseen barriers. Maybe cracking the facade was simply the beginning of a much larger fracture, a fundamental remaking of who he would become and how he would operate. But a sudden flicker of realization hit him as he reached for the office door. His sense of self was tethered not to external judgments, but to the internal landscapes he was starting to navigate. The transformation he sought was not only bound by others' perceptions, but by tangible changes he could initiate within himself. Tomorrow would bring the first test. Could he maintain this newfound conviction in the face of the team's expectations? As he stepped into his office, uncertainty hung palpably in the air, ready to challenge him once more. The real work was only just beginning, and with it came the question, how deep was he willing to delve into the uncharted waters of his own truth? Harold awoke the next morning with a sense of impending change hovering on the edge of his thoughts. He stared at the ceiling, the familiar patterns blending and shifting in the waking light. The heaviness of yesterday's conversation weighed on him, yet he felt a spark igniting within. This was a pivotal moment, the potential for something far greater than merely saving his career. It could be the dawn of a renewed self. As he prepared for work, each action became a symbolic gesture. The tightness in his chest served as a reminder of the vulnerability he had chosen to embrace. Standing at the mirror, he scrutinized his reflection, searching for the strength hidden behind the weariness of his eyes. This was a man on the brink of discovering deeper layers, a shell cracking to reveal richer potential. Upon arrival at the office, Harold was struck by the palpable atmosphere charged with uncertainty. Colleagues navigated the corridors with tentative glances, their previous skepticism now mingling with curiosity. Would he, the former ghost, truly commit to the path of openness? His first task was to schedule the check-ins promised to the team. Consumption of fear clawed at his resolve. Would they see his initiative as genuine, or would they dismiss it as another fleeting attempt at change? Harold set to work, drafting an email that highlighted accountability, personal growth, and a shared determination to bridge the gaps within the team. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, and the words began to flow, each keystroke binding him to his intention. As he hit send, a rush of adrenaline surged through him, almost bewildering. The decision to invite dialogue was significant. Would they reciprocate? Would they trust him enough to share their inner landscapes? The hours slipped by as anxiety intertwined with anticipation. Each time a colleague approached, he examined their expressions, seeking insights into what they thought about his efforts. A mixture of dread and hope swelled within him. He was becoming acutely aware of the responsibility of leadership. Authenticity was his immediate currency, but was he ready to invest it fully? Then came the first check-in. It was just him and Jennifer in the conference room, an intimate setting charged with history. He took a deep breath before speaking, courage intertwining with trepidation. "I think we both know there's a lot to unpack here," he began, gauging her response. Jennifer nodded, her gaze earnest yet guarded. "We do, but let's make it a safe space, Harold. Being vulnerable is still new for all of us." He felt like an explorer, standing at the precipice of the unknown. Could he truly forge this connection? "I appreciate that," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I want to know what you need from me to make this work. I can only change if I understand how to create a supportive environment. I want us all to experience growth together, not just on my terms." Their dialogue danced through the intricacies of their feelings, struggles, aspirations, disappointments, a tapestry of shared humanity. Each voice in the room echoed back the unfulfilled desires for trust and connection. With every shared story, Harold felt barriers within himself crumble just a little more, revealing unrevealed fears and latent strengths. By the time they reached the end of their conversation, he found himself confronting an unexpected discomfort, the realization that he had begun stirring a dormant capacity for empathy he hadn't fully recognized. This was a skill he needed to nurture, not just for others, but for himself. As he left the meeting, determination blossomed alongside uncertainty. But just as he felt a flicker of hope igniting into a flame, a knock shattered the moment. It was Kevin, a notorious skeptic, who halted him on the way to his office. "You think this is enough?" Kevin's words dripped with skepticism. "You can't just change overnight, Harold. You're setting yourself up for failure." The challenge loomed ominously, casting shadows over his tentative flame. Perhaps Kevin was right. Change was unpredictable, and the path was fraught with pitfalls. But the choice lay before him: abandon his newfound conviction or stand firm against the tide of doubt. With resolve settling over him, Harold squared his shoulders. "No, Kevin, it starts with us believing in it, and I'm going to prove it." Deep down, he recognized that this confrontation was a critical juncture. How far was he willing to go to train his heart and mind for the possibilities of true change? The tension from his exchange with Kevin reverberated through Harold as he returned to his desk. Despite the riptide of doubt, his determination felt palpable, a flame stoked by the very skepticism that sought to extinguish it. Still, his thoughts remained cloaked in questions. Had he truly begun anything meaningful? Or was this just the beginning of a longer, harder struggle? He settled into his chair, the wooden surface familiar and cold beneath him, and forced himself to focus on next steps. With an undeniable sense of urgency, Harold opened a new document. Today, he had to outline a more extensive plan for his check-ins, not just for Jennifer, but reaching every member of the team. Without a cohesive approach, these sessions could easily devolve into empty conversations, masking the deeper issues that had long plagued their culture. As the hours ebbed away, the initial wave of adrenaline transformed into a subtle anxiety brewing in his stomach. Overcoming his apprehensions turned out to be more intricate than he had anticipated. He looked around the office, noting the divided factions, those who supported him and those who remained guarded, like Kevin. Would their skepticism eclipse the budding trust he was attempting to foster? Harold's internal clock ticked insistently. He had set a deadline for himself to have a tangible structure ready before the day ended. It was as if he were standing on a tightrope, balancing the risk of failure against the need for progress. He didn't want to repeat past mistakes. The past year had been riddled with half measures and false starts. Those feelings of inadequacy lingered like smoke, stifling, but they drove him forward, cloaked in a resolve to do better. With each section of his plan, he wrote with intent.
He envisioned sessions where every voice had weight, where vulnerability was not just encouraged but normalized. He acknowledged the challenges ahead, but stifled the nagging thought that he might be overreaching. Reaching new heights required climbing over old notions of how things had always been done. Soon, the office grew quieter, the day settling into a hush. He was lost in his writing when he felt a presence behind him. It was Marta, one of his colleagues who had been quiet ever since the conversation about change had started. "You working on that plan?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied, looking up from his screen, inviting her into the space he was creating. She leaned against the edge of his desk, uncertainty etched on her face. "Do you think it will really make a difference with those who resist?" A flicker of doubt sparked once more within him, but he remained steady. "It will, if we commit to it. Change can only happen if we're honest and brave enough to confront what's uncomfortable," he said, surprising himself with the assertiveness in his tone. She pondered his words, her brows furrowed in thought. "There's a lot of work to be done, Harold. People like Kevin won't just change overnight." "I know."
"I'm not expecting miracles," he admitted, realizing the limitations of his own optimism. But the light in her eyes suggested the possibility of awakening something dormant within her as well. "But every conversation counts. It's not about everybody believing me right away. It's about laying the groundwork." Her expression softened, possibly recognizing the sincerity behind his words. "I'm with you. Just keep us in the loop. Your optimism might be what we need to get the rest of the team on board." He smiled, the weight of that moment grounding him more than he expected. "Thanks, Marta. Together, we can make it happen," he reassured. As she walked off, Harold focused on his screen again, the words forming into a cohesive vision. But the unexpected peace shattered as another figure emerged, casting a long shadow across the room. Kevin leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed defiantly. "Hope is a nice idea, but it won't fix the real issues. You're just masking them with optimism." Harold's heart raced. The confrontation lingered in the air, dulling the brightness he had just found. Could he truly confront Kevin without reverting to old insecurities? The moment had come. Was he ready to face not just external doubt, but the internal fears that lay beneath as well? Harold took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts, as Kevin's words hung heavily in the air. He had faced countless reflections of doubt in his life, but this challenge was different. It came from someone who once stood alongside him. At this moment, he was not just defending his plans. He was confronting his own insecurities, weaving the fabric of his newfound identity. "Kevin," he started, his voice steady yet earnest, "I understand skepticism is natural, especially after the past. But what if this time is different?" The dialogue that flowed was not just about him. It was about the collective journey they were embarking on together. Kevin raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Different how? Hope doesn't change what we need to fix around here. You need to show us that you're committed." "Commitment begins with honesty," Harold replied, the strength in his voice surprising even him. "I know I've made mistakes, and I'm not here to cover them up with empty optimism. This plan isn't a quick fix. It's a long journey we'll traverse together. I need your honesty just as I offer mine." Kevin's arms unfolded slightly, and for the first time, Harold noticed the flickering of interest in his eyes. The terrain between them shifted, and as tension filled the air, Harold seized the moment. "What if we set specific metrics to determine our progress? If I fail to deliver, I want you all to hold me accountable. But let's measure this together. Make it real," he insisted, his heart racing with each word. Kevin seemed taken aback. Surprise crept onto his face. "Metrics? You think throwing numbers into it will change anything?" "No, but it will create a structure," Harold clarified, feeling the weight of a burgeoning determination fueling his spirit. "Together, we can assess our growth without deflecting the hard conversations. It's not merely about faith in one person. It's about faith in the collective. If we leave old wounds unattended, they'll fester. We need to ensure voices are heard, even when it's uncomfortable. The room remained tense, but a whisper of intrigue flickered through the atmosphere between them. Kevin's posture shifted, his arms relaxed, revealing a glimmer of contemplation. "I just don't see how all of this will actually pan out," Kevin confessed, hesitating. "Then let's create opportunities to see it unfold," Harold suggested, gesturing towards a nearby whiteboard. "How about we draft an agenda for our first check-ins together? We can discuss improvements, concerns, and share our personal stories of growth. We'll document it, hold each other accountable, and create a culture of transparency." As Kevin considered the proposal, Harold's heart raced. This wasn't just about convincing Kevin, it was about embracing leadership as a shared responsibility. He wasn't merely stepping out of the shadows, he was placing himself into the center of a collaborative renewal. "I'll give it a shot," Kevin finally replied, a cautious tone underlining his words. "But it will take more than just meetings. It's going to demand real change, not just talk." "It will take all of us," Harold affirmed, feeling the flicker of hope deepen into a flame. "And that begins today. I'm committed to this path, ready to face every challenge, including the doubts. This isn't just my journey, it's ours." In that moment, Harold realized the profound shift within himself. He was no longer the man weighed down by loneliness and regret. He was becoming a leader who accepted imperfections yet sought growth, encouraging authenticity not only from himself but from his team as well. His voice resonated with commitment rather than desperation. Later that evening, Harold basks in a quiet satisfaction. He had faced skepticism head-on and emerged not only standing firm, but buoyed by shared ambition. The act of confronting Kevin had fortified him deeper than mere words could express. As he scribbled his thoughts in his journal that night, the reflections started to illuminate the path ahead. Each setback no longer loomed as an insurmountable obstacle. Instead, they became opportunities for dialogue and healing, crafting a tapestry woven with resilience. A week later, the team met for the first check-in in the very room that once felt like an abyss of judgment. Laughter echoed softly through the air, mingled with unearthing stories as they revisited their collective past. Strides against vulnerability surged with each voice that joined. And as Harold shared his own experiences, the barriers slowly dissolved. "See? We're moving together," he said, an earnest smile gracing his face, his heart no longer chained by the fear of rejection. In the face of their transformation, he discovered not only his strength, but also the pillars of connection, emboldening those around him to open up. For the first time in years, Harold felt seen, not simply as the person he had been, but as the individual he was becoming. Tangible change had begun, and each meaningful connection forged ignited a promise within him. That day, he realized he had not just reclaimed his voice, he had restored not only a belief in himself, but a newfound appreciation for the relationships he had desperately longed to mend. As the meeting drew to a close, the slivers of doubt washed away in the tide of transformation. Harold left the office empowered. Through collaboration and accountability, he had learned that the essence of true connection lay in facing the uncomfortable, evoking healing rather than avoidance. The journey was far from over, but tomorrow brought another chance to grow and another step toward rebuilding a legacy, his own legacy of resilience. And in that moment of clarity, facing the future didn't feel burdensome anymore. It felt liberating. The weight once manifesting as solitude transformed into a profound sense of purpose. Harold had not only paved the way for a team, but also for himself. At long last, he embraced a life steeped in connection, understanding, and possibility. The stories ahead awaited him, and he was ready to embrace them fully. Now this is your moment to resonate with Harold's transformation. Don't hold back. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes a huge difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. And share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions. Don't wait even one more second to share.